What's going on, everybody? We are here at Mastercrafted. Today, we are going to be going over a Defenders tier list coming up for the teams tournament, kind of where Phil and I think things should go in as far as like your priority and your composition. This is going to kind of help break down what armies you could use for that role and how to use them the most effectively for your composition. Phil, how you doing today?
Great. I'm excited. We had a good tournament this past weekend. There's going to be a video that's going to be put out shortly, just giving all of our experiences and kind of going through it, and it turned out really well. But I'm excited to talk about teams because that is what we all have on the mind now. We have a month to prove ourselves, and to get some more ITC points. So we're all looking forward to it.
Yeah, it is coming up quicker than you know it. We are just a month out right now from teams itself, and whew, man, the excitement's already building. I'm talking to all of our players and stuff. Everybody's like, "Oh, I'm thinking about running this." Things are a little bit more set in stone now as far as the rules we're going to be playing with. So people are getting hyped.
Yeah, absolutely. So Lane and I have discussed this at length. Even though we're on different teams, we definitely share a lot of the same feelings when it comes to preparing our teams the best way possible. Lane is obviously a captain for Wildhammer, and I am just a lowly player for Denver 40K Fight Club. But we do see a lot of things, and we do a lot of practice because we want to go out there and be effective. And one of the most important parts about teams in 40K is identifying what your armies can do. And I'm not just saying on the tabletop, but I'm saying in the pairing process. Because as we said before, this is all getting in preparation for pairing. So you need to identify within your team where your armies are. And this is just a very general understanding. So I already talked about last time, having your team fill out your matrices, see what you're good into, not good into. But let's say you don't do that. Let's say you don't have enough information to make those decisions, or your players don't give you that information. We want to give you the tools to have a general understanding of what the good decisions are to make. So what we've done a little bit is broken down a Defender tier list using our own experiences, as well as the breakdown from Stat Check, the matchup matrix. And this goes off every matchup of two armies, and then the positive or negative in terms of win differential. So that is what we're looking at when we're making these. And the reason they're in the tier order they are, it's not just because they're like the best army, but it is the best average overall. And that is part of it, right? Part of it's our own impression of the army. The other part of it is total average in terms of differential. And that's what, for us, makes the difference for a good defender that we want to put out early, which is quote unquote a higher risk because they can play into more armies, and they don't have the narrow field. They have every army that could be put out there as a defender. And then as you go on and on, those defenders get less and less. So hopefully if you do your pairing right, your initial pairings will set you up for your later pairings.
Yeah, it is definitely one of the things we did not have in our back pocket ready to go when we went down to Dallas on the team I was on. We weren't quite prepared for just how important having good defenders and a true game plan going into day one was. And we learned fast because it is brutal to do pairings without a good understanding of why this is so important.
Yeah, for sure. And thankfully, I can say we're a little better for our wear. So we learned through the crucible, and now we have come out the other side prepared and ready to go. So, Lane, why don't you talk us through the first? We'll talk with our strong openers. We'll get started right with those. And why don't you just give a little bit of breakdown in terms of things that we look at when we're evaluating a good defender?
Yeah. Phil already kind of mentioned it. It was things that, armies that just really don't have a ton of bad matchups. And these are some of the best, especially when you are looking here on this matchup matrix. Orcs, looking through here, they only have one true red, and it's because there's a total of one game played. Like, that's not even amazing data. Orcs are just very, very consistent. They score super, super well. And that is one of the trademarks of these strong openers, quote unquote, that really make them some of the best options to just kind of, this is what we're throwing up as a defender. It doesn't matter what you throw at us. They are going to perform pretty well. Looking at, Tyranids as well, they may not have a ton of, super blue matchups, but they only have a couple of super reds, Thousand Suns and Imperial Knights, for example. These are armies that when you put them out there to defend, you're not like, oh man, they're going to get just destroyed on the average. You're still going to have to pay attention to what lists you are bringing and what lists your opponent has. But just as the broad sense, these 5 armies have just a very, very good statistical chance to, give you at least 8-12s on that differential scoring. Like they're going to at least perform fairly well into most things. They're not going to lose you a ton of points by getting thrown out there.
Yeah, and that's a huge part of it. I'm gonna say this multiple times. Lane will probably say this multiple times. As you get more and more experience with teams and your matchups and all that stuff, this can change. This can fluctuate. You can say, well, I want to bait out this certain matchup early, right? Where maybe we feel like it's a certain level and our opponents may feel like it's a different level. And we might try to bait out a worse matchup. That way we have an opportunity to get a more favorable matchup later on. And each one of those things are going to make a difference for you as a player and you as a captain when you're doing those pairings to actually execute. Because you'll see an army up here, Leagues of Votann. Lane, I thought they were trash. Nobody plays them anymore. But if we look at the matchup matrix, it tells us they're okay. They score well. They don't have a lot of hard reds. That they can go into a lot of different things, and we'd be pretty okay with putting them out there. So even an army like Leagues of Votann, which a lot of people are a little bit tough on right now, has a very strong place in teams.
Yeah, even though it might not win many of the games that it gets thrown into, it's still not going to get blown away. And that is one of the core parts of being a good defender, is putting up points on the board, even though you're probably going into bad matchups and still just hanging in there as best you can.
Now, does that first defender have to do that? Does that first defender have to be the one that blunts or gets the averages? No, definitely not. And there's a whole strategy behind why we put the first defender out there. But for those that aren't familiar with teams, Lane, there's a specific benefit that defender gets, which is significant, which is they'll get to pick the board, right? So in terms of that individual, they're the ones who get to select the board, which is awesome because it makes a big difference for that defender. If it's a heavy board or a medium heavy board or even a light board, like what armies can benefit in those areas. Because I could say, and you talked about it before the show, like Tau, if they get to select their board, they are definitely a lot better off than if they don't get to select their board, because then they can be put in a really tough spot. Doesn't make them a bad defender. It just means like you have to be the one to pick the board if you're playing Tau into a bad matchup. Otherwise, it gets from bad to worse.
Yeah, it definitely is a lot more dependent, and it'll even, vary from detachment to detachment in some of these armies. When it comes to orcs, especially if you're running tactical versus warhorde, you're even going to be looking for a couple different boards, but ensuring you have that pick as a defender just increases your viability into bad matchups. And that's very helpful as a defender.
So you can see across the top our strong openers, orcs, nids, space marines, Astra Militarum, which we genuinely believe with the amount of scoring units that it has, as well as Leagues of Votann, are some of the best defenders in the game. That does not mean you need to have those armies in your group of 8 to be effective. But those 5, we have found statistically and through our own experience that they are some of the best defenders out there. If we're talking about you not having any information at all, or maybe a baseline of information from your team and you need to make some decisions, this is what we would recommend.
Yeah. All right. Moving on down, we have the aggressively average tier. Phil, why are those armies in that tier?
Yeah, so now we're in a position where, for those that I'll just spit it out there, WTC rules, which is pretty much what every team tournament does. Combat is a little bit different, specifically going through terrain. So normally it's 1 inch engagement range. If you can't end on the other side, you're going to be outside of an inch. For those that have played 40K for any amount of time, said, okay, well, I'm going to be an inch off the wall, right? For 32 millimeter bases, that means you can't fit on the other side, which is very tough, which means you won't be able to combat without going all the way around. WTC has a rule that states that if they cannot get through the wall and cannot get within engagement range, but they have a successful charge, their engagement range is increased to 2 inches. Now, there's a whole list of rules and stipulations for it. If you have a question on it, either hit us up in the Discord, you can post a comment and we'll link it, and I'll put it in the description of this video, just so you have an understanding of what it is, because the WTC rules around ruins and combat are different. In saying that, that means combat armies inherently, especially on the heavier boards or just in general, have an advantage where you cannot screen me out. You can't force me to go all the way around to the other side of the wall. I can fight you on that side with the first rank, which is huge for combat armies. So armies like Death Guard, like World Eaters. And we are basing these off the new codexes. We think Death Guard and World Eaters can be some of the best defenders out there because of combat, because of all the tricks that they have. We really, really like them. CSM. Bile, we talked to John Holbrick already about Bile in terms of how well it scores in almost everything. It is very, very good, right? Necrons, same thing. They score well. Eldari, they score well. Chaos Demons, Shadow Legion, it might be the new boogeyman on the block. At our tournament here down in the Springs, I must have seen like 8 to 11 maybe Shadow Legion players, which makes sense. It's a very good detachment. And once again, it scores incredibly well. All these detachments, armies score well. Genestealer Cult, Host of Ascension, Final Day. Like, that's what we're looking to do. We're looking to send out armies that we know will score into the majority of matchups that our opponents could put out into us. And I am of the firm belief that all of these can do that.
Yeah, they might not have, they might have a few more reds, I guess is the way to put that, in terms of those armies versus our strong openers, but they still are very, very consistent. Even though they might be a little bit more matchup dependent, still excessively solid when it comes to putting numbers up on the board. A lot of people have been hating on the World Eaters, but honestly, the new play style, it plays a little slower. You're not just, old World Eaters, I found when we were doing pairings, were just like, if we get a good matchup, they can maybe get a 20. If we get a bad one, they can maybe get a 0. I think the new codex is really going to help. Just if you can figure out their newer play style. I know it's different, and that's scary, Reddit, I understand, but if you can figure it out and you can play the normal turns like the rest of us, turns 3 to 5 where the game's normally played, you can put up great numbers and be very consistent with new World Eaters. And I think they're going to be very good on WTC terrain.
Yeah, absolutely, no doubt, no argument from me there. But if you look, that is a pretty strong aggressively average, right? That is a pretty strong tier of armies. If you saw those 7 armies across from you in teams, I don't know if I'd be super happy as an opponent. Like, man, all of these are kind of good, and I don't know if I want to play to all of these. Especially if we sprinkled like an orcs list in there, that would be a very, very formidable team of 8. Yeah,
very, very good. And I think that's one of the actual like key things here. The strong openers, I think, are like closer to the average of 10-10 a lot more, or even slight losses. But the aggressively average tier itself has a few more red, sure, but some of them have a lot more greens. Like, some of them are just like, you put Death Guard out there, and if your opponent has just tons of melee armies, it's like, okay, well, you can only, throw so much at me that I'm actually worried about. And so, like, especially as like a second defender, if you can pull one of the armies that they don't have a good matchup out of the way early, like, whew, man, you can do some work with a lot of the armies in this tier.
Yeah. Does this make these armies bad attackers?
No, not at all.
So like, people are like, I don't want you to get like freaked out and be like, oh, because Phil and Lane said they were good defenders, that makes them bad attackers. No. They could do both. That's the best part. Do not like blinder yourself and say, oh, just because it's a good defender means it's a bad attacker. No, because as a Genestealer Cult player myself, like, I'm very happy pinning someone into a bad matchup and saying, do you want to play Genestealer Cult or do you want to play like Death Guard? Pick one, because they're both awful for you for this specific matchup. And we can do that with any of these armies, right? Like, so, the pairing process is very fluid. You cannot stick yourself and be rigid with, I said this was going to be my number 2 defender, so I'm always going to put it out there. You have to be flexible. Those things change.
Yeah. There's so many layers, and trying to just peel this back to like a base understanding is somewhat difficult, but I think this is a very good way to explain it in terms of, if you stick to this, at least to a certain extent, you'll see success. But you can still put any of these in any position and do well, as long as you understand fundamentally what you're trying to do with those lists.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Well, next up is our best backups. So we've run through aggressively average, strong openers, and now we are at a point where maybe we're the 4th round in, 3rd round in, and we have to put another army out there in terms of the pairing. And we'd be pretty okay with these things because hopefully we've pulled out a lot of the red matchups for some of these armies, right? And that's the point. That's why they're later on. Doesn't necessarily mean they can't go out and win games. They definitely can. But we need to get rid of a few things so we ourselves don't get pinned into bad matchups. And that's super important. So if I had to, absolutely had to, I'd be pretty happy with Custodes as a defender later in the round. If we pull that up, there's not necessarily a lot of bad matchups, especially with new Lions because of the +1 to wound. It does make things a lot easier, but there are some like hard reds, right? Drakari, I think, is a big one. I would not want to see Gene Stealer called Host of Ascension. It's just too many bodies that I don't have enough shooting and combat to kind of chase down. And it's a lot of saves that I will eventually fail. But I have some great matchups too. And I'd be pretty happy as a defender being able to pick from any of those. Yeah, Space Marines are still solid. Across the board, you can see the majority of our Space Marines fall into this tier, especially like we just talked about for WTC terrain. We'd be happy with any of those, but Tau is the one that stands out to me the most. Lane, why is Tau in best backups?
Again, man, it all comes down to that board selection. Like, if you can pick a board for a shooting exclusive mono, like just mono shooting army like Tau, it helps them out so much. Right now, they are like, I think it was like a 43% win percentage or something the last time we did the meta watch, and it is just, it's not amazing for everything, but if you can just give them that little bit of edge, they really can still do well. They can hold their own. And again, right, it's teams. We're just basing this off differential. That little bit of extra board selection priority can help a lot when it comes to keeping that army close.
Yeah, for sure. And then the other one that stands out here that not a lot of people are playing is AdMech. And I would say if the army itself was better, it probably would be higher because I would rate it like if the army was better, it would be in that kind of Gene Stealer cult style of board presence, maximum scoring. It's got a lot of units. It's priced so dirt cheap. Like it can go out there and actually do whatever secondaries it needs to do. It can overwhelm primaries. It can out OC you. It can do all of these things. And that makes it a good defender. Now, the reason it's not higher up is because generally the rules right now, and it's only for a handful of armies, need a little bit of help. But to say that, they were at home nations, and one of the countries took AdMech to some very good success, and they kept their differentials close, which for an army like that is super important.
Yeah, AdMech, it's just, they just need some love. Just, James, give them a little love. They need it. But they definitely can still do the job in that defender slot. Again, if we're looking over here at stat check, you can just see, they've got some reds, but they don't lose hard to most things. They'll probably lose, don't get us wrong, but they won't lose hard to many things, which still is a trait of, a good defender.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next tier, you could do worse at the very bottom. But this doesn't make them bad armies, Lane. Like, we're going to keep prefacing this. This is not a tier list of, like, good versus bad armies. This is our feelings regarding defenders and where we would want them and how we would like to use them. So in this tier, it's Grey Knights, it's T-Sons, it's Death Watch, Sisters, and Imperial Knights.
Yeah.
Now, that's a wild one because Imperial Knights have dominated the meta lane. Death Watch is one of the top armies in the game, and we put them right next to Sisters. What is going on?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like all of these have particularly bad matchups into certain things, and if you are using them as defenders, that could be exploited, especially in teams, right? If you throw Imperial Knights out first, guess what? If people are following the standard and have two anti-tank lists that they can just throw out there, Imperial Knights is not a great choice as a defender then. Who would have thought? Yeah.
But they have some great matchups too, though, right? So if we use them later in the round where those anti-tank things are gone, like those lists are gone, we can definitely find our way into better matchups for sure. Because look at all those blues. We are pretty happy putting them out there as long as we can avoid some of the disastrous choices of some very, very bad matchups.
Yeah.
Now, Grey Knights, it's the same thing, right? Like they have some very, very bad matchups that you don't want them to go into. And we want to avoid pretty much at all costs because they are an army that can push differentials, right? Like they're an attacking army. Yes, they could be a good defender, but as someone who has the 4-ups sometimes they go your way and sometimes they don't. And when they don't go your way, it feels a little bad. So an army that relies on those and can struggle in other parts of the game, we definitely want to avoid
Mm-hmm.
just in general.
Yep. And that's kind of been the thing as we've gone down this tier list, right? Any of those top ones, you could have as first, second, or third defender, and you are going to feel just fine pretty much every time. As we work down here, it's just there's so many more matchups you need to have pulled out of the way to really have these work well and not just be losing you points because there's too many bad matchups left. And these armies are just much more likely to still have bad matchups that you could run into if your pairings aren't great.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. But once again, that's what makes teams so interesting, right? Like the pairing process itself is a game within itself. So you have to be prepared to adjust on the fly and, be able to make decisions based on what your opponent has left and what you have left. And yeah, game within a game. But this last one, definitely better at attacking, is where we would say these armies lie. But once again, these does not make these armies bad in any way. Two that stand out, obviously, Chaos Knights and Drukhari. Now, Chaos Knights have an interesting, so do Imperial Knights. The one thing they have going for them is a crap ton of OC, right? Like 8 OC per dog or armor, they just sit on objectives, they can out OC you, can they do all those things? But Chaos Knights falls into the same trap of Imperial Knights sometimes, of if there's too many anti-tank lists out there, we want to avoid them. I want to be able to put them into different armies. But they have that issue as well of they probably want certain boards. Now, Chaos Knights can go through walls. Imperial Knights, I don't think, can they as well?
Not with their armigers. They can with the bigs, obviously, but
yeah. So Chaos Knights can go through walls. They have the advantage there in terms of board presence, especially on these denser WTC boards. But Drukhari, they are an army that pushes differential. They are an army that really, really doesn't want to see 13 war dogs, right? Like that would be terrifying. They do not have enough AP strength and damage to push through 13 dogs, I would say. And they want those specific matchups, which as an attacker they could do.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of prove that point, if we bring up Drukhari, definitely some very green greens or blue blues, whichever, but also a fair amount of red reds. The thing that sucks is there's not a ton of data on some of these other factions right now because no one's playing them. But there's also a little bit of reason for that. So yeah, they just, especially in a teams format, a lot of people are prepared to either, Chaos Knights I feel like are just so common. And it's funny that they're kind of in that same tier because they kind of function the same way. You're just looking for very good matchups. And if you're putting Drukhari up and your opponent has Chaos Knights, they are going to be like, oh man, finally, all these dumb indirect shots are just going to slap and chew right through your army. It's, they just really can suffer. It's very common for indirect lists, I feel like in general, at least one, to sneak onto a lot of teams. And Drukhari definitely suffer when it comes to.
Yeah, I mean, that's why that 13 dog list was all over the place that we saw at the Home Nations Cup. That's why a lot of people will take it because they're just like, well, you have any cheap screens, anything like that, I'm just going to kill it. I just by density of shots, which sucks. But Eldar, Drukhari, Ynnari don't want to see their screens die to nothing. They have to be able to trade with you. Not to say that it's bad, but we want to avoid some of those reds to get them in the best position to score.
Yeah. And then last but not least, Imperial Agents. I'm sure we're probably going to see at least 2 or 3 of these coming, to the teams tournament. People just love them.
Yeah, well, an army that needs some help in a position in the game where it's very, very selective. Imperial Agents needs the right matchup, so that means that they serve much better as the attacker, or potentially your last defender if you can get the right pulls, and then whatever the forgotten ones were in terms of that last matchup, maybe you're able to pair it up that way. But overall, it's super important. You're going to be in a position where you have to put them into the right matchup, and you can't do that as a defender early. You would have to do it very, very late or use them as an attacker to pin them into an army that they actually stand a chance into.
Yeah, and then one other thing is we did not have a codex picture to throw on here for Emperor's Children. Phil, where are Emperor's Children going to be landing on this tier list?
They're going to be in the best backups. Genuinely, for me, they do have some scoring opportunities. They do have the capabilities to go out there and out OC. Noise Marines are fantastic. Lord Cacophonuses are really, really good. And I'd be happy seeing them anywhere on this, anywhere between best backups and maybe aggressively average, but I don't feel right about that. But I'd be okay with them in both of those situations, except for I do feel like World Eaters are just going to be straight up better. CSM Biles better. Cast Demons are just straight up better as defenders. And I'd rather put them into something that we can more or less control. Yeah, like they can do some work, but they need the right matchup to do it, and we gotta wait later to do that right matchup.
Yeah, the being able to, especially if you can pick something slow and not Death Guard in particular, they will really excel. But yeah, you've got to be able to abuse that speed in the right matchup, like Phil's saying, and defending just isn't gonna probably be the best fit for him.
Defending early, especially defending early, is the wrong choice to do with Emperor's Children. Defending later could work, right? Like second or third round, you pull a couple things, you can see that the 4 remaining armies are something that the Emperor's Children wants to see, and you can pull out one of those matchups and get your board preference. That could work.
Yeah, it could, but it might not. So in this case, what you really want to do is just you take nothing but strong openers and aggressively average, right? When you're building your team, you look at your friends and say, I don't care what you wanted to play. We're only playing with things out of the top 2 tiers here because we want everything that can defend. We don't need good attackers. We just need everybody to defend. Is that the takeaway here, Phil?
No, because at the end of the day, we need someone that can push differential, right? Like at the end of the day, I need people that are going to like 20-0 someone or get 18 or 19 points. Like the whole point of this is, yes, I need you to get a 10-10, but I also need to put this out of draw range. So I need to get more points. So the whole point of all of this is your strong openers, aggressively average, either should be keeping their games close or a slight loss or a slight win, where it's a single point here or there. And then you are lining up like your headshot or your slam dunk, right? And you're lining that up to be like, okay, now we're going to get Adeptus Custodes into their best matchup because we've put out other good defenders, and the Custodes player is going to go 20-0. So like Folger Piles, during the most recent Home Nations Cup, that was kind of his job, right? Like if you look at his differentials, he's scoring 18, 19, 20 points. Now it helps that he's a fantastic player, but he's playing against some of the best players in the world. And because of their pairing process, what they're able to do, he was in that role of just like aggressively attacking bad matchups and setting his team up that they never drew. They were never like, they were in a couple of close ones, but they were able to push those differentials because of, opportunities like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the other things too is like we're also going to do, I don't know if it's going to be best attackers or differential pushers, but that's going to be the main theme when we do another tier list for teams. And you're probably going to see some of these same armies rising right up there to the top because they're just very, very good. The difference is, when you're a defender, your opponent is going, we can pick the best things we have to deal with this, right? When you're an attacker, you're going to say, hey, these are things that have pretty good matchups here, right? And so it's definitely still going to have a lot of similarities for some factions at least. And so, don't just watch this video. You got to watch the next one. You got to see what the best attackers are so you know what flexible options you do have.
No, Lane, that's great advice. Absolutely. This is like a fraction, like this is like 5% of information. If we were to like talk about teams and the pairing process and all these things, I could talk about it till I'm blue in the face because there's so much dang information. There's so many variables because every variable between the attackers that get put out, the defenders get put out, the boards that get taken away, right? Because you don't select boards until the very end, right? Like it's after everyone had all the pairings have happened.
It's after each round.
After each round.
When we go through each defender and they get paired, then you roll and see who works through it first. And so like 2 boards are just always taken off at a time, basically. And the order is determined, and we'll probably have a video going through the entire process just so everybody's ready for it. But yeah, there's a lot to it. And so that can also really affect, by the time you get down to your 3rd defender and 4 of the options are just off the table, it can really affect what you're like, does this matchup even matter? Like there's only heavy boards left, right? We're not worried about this being an attacker now because all the light boards are gone. And so still, if your opponent still has Tau left, we talked about that. That's a good example. If your opponent still has Tau left, but you got rid of all the light and medium light boards, you can go, okay, well, I can still throw melee heavy armies at their Tau because they didn't do a good job in securing a light board for later in the rounds. So there's all kinds of levels to it. But in general, if you're looking at your team composition, just looking at this tier list and going, okay, these are some of the factions we have that could maybe be reliable starting points for, what do we put out first and second, especially.
Yeah, no, perfect. And I think a great way to end it, Lane. In terms of information, this is bare bones, essential, basic. The things that you can do to help yourself. Go on stat check. You can look at this matchup matrix and you can make your own assumptions based off those things. Next thing is asking your fellow teammates, like finding out what their lists do. And that way you have a good understanding of what their good matchups or bad matchups are. Creating a matrix. That is like the next level of work, right? So like, you have a matrix, you have all the matchups in there, like we do in Denver 40K Fight Club. And then every player is responsible for putting in those matrices. Win-loss differentials. That way the captains have as much information. And then you're putting in like terrain preferences and layouts. And now you're doing it based on the mission. So every mission changes the win or loss differential, and you go forward from there. But there is a lot of information that you can do to be as effective as possible when you get to the table to do your pairings. And the last thing I would say is like just practice, right? Just play games. It doesn't matter. Like I would love to say that you could do it. Like you're only going to be playing on WTC layouts with the missions that you're going to have, but that's not the case, right? Like you just need to play games at 40K. Not everyone has the opportunity to play WTC layouts all the time, but if you just go to a tournament and you're familiar with your army, that should help you for a team tournament. It will.
Yeah, and that's one of the other things too, right? Talking about having that data, a lot of the times we play on GW boards, as Phil said, right? You might not have the opportunity to play on WTC, but if you're a melee heavy army, switching over to WTC terrain, you should be so excited because I hate it. Let's go back to GW. I play guard. Let's open those boards up. Let my 4 tanks just have free fire across the board. But yeah, just that little glimmer of hope. All you World Eaters players who are still looking for a reason to live, apparently. There it is. WTC is on the way if you're coming to the teams events. So start playing teams. You'll love your army even more.
Yeah, for sure.
But
yeah, all right, Lane, you want to finish off with anything else?
I think that's it. We are going to have more content coming out as always, and be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to comment as well. Tell us why we're wrong. Tell us why we're right. We just want to hear back from you. And don't forget that victory isn't given, it's forged, and it's forged right here on Mastercrafted. We'll see y'all next time.